Ну что ж, добрый вечер, дамы и господа.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, hello to everyone who is with us in person and those joining us online. It is a wonderful warm evening in St. Petersburg. We are very lucky that the first day of Culture 2.0, the weather is nice to us. But actually I was stuck in traffic. This is why we're starting a little bit late. But I think since in St. Petersburg everyone is late, so we're starting on time. This session is called Mass Culture. Is it Kitsch or Boon? I think it is a bit old-fashioned words in terms of pop culture. If we were modern in terms of pop culture, we would choose different words. Let me first introduce our speakers, both offline and online. Together with us today is Lyudmila Zaporozhtseva, professor of School of Integrated Communications at the Higher School of Economics from Russia. Hello, Lyudmila. Arsene Gonchukov, director, screenwriter, poet, and writer, also from Russia. Good evening. Vsevolod Lisovsky, director, commissioner from Center of Theatrical Research, Transformation from Russia. And we also have wonderful speakers online. Thank you very much for joining us today. It's one of the advantages of the coronavirus era that we can join each other online. So our first online speaker is Kathy Merlock Jackson from the USA. Thank you for joining. And Garrett Malcolm, Royal Designer for Industry and Creative Director at Design Manchester from Great Britain. Good evening. I think everyone is clear that the part that is offline, well, it is regular. We are not limited in our discussion, but since many people join us online, so there is a bit of a lag, so we'll sometimes have to wait for response. So it's just because of technology. So first of all, let me start off with an introductory part. We're going to speak about mass culture or pop culture. So what do we understand mass culture to be? It is something from the modern world. It is democratic. It is for everybody, regardless of the social status, education, or anything else. It is highly adaptive to the current events. Mass culture is also takes into consideration some modern developments. It is standardized, simplified, simplified in terms of meaning. It might be a stereotype, but if you always consume mass culture, a mechanism is required to do it. At the same time, there is an elite culture. Unlike mass culture, the elite culture seeks new ways of producing some meanings, and it produces highly valuable, unique experiences. But it is acceptable and available to a limited number of people, to some highly educated people who understand it, or just in terms of material resources, some things are not available to everyone, so due to economic reasons. There's going to be a number of issues that we will address today. The first one is it even relevant to divide mass culture and elite culture? Are they in opposition, or are they sometimes one and the same? And what is the difference between mass culture and elite culture? And can mass culture be of good quality? And can culture change our lives? I think the last question is unnecessary. Of course it can change our lives. And at the end of my speech, I wanted to say that both mass culture and elite culture can be compared to wine, because wine sometimes is quite simple and mass-produced, and many people can drink it and like it. but there is a more expensive wine, elite wine, that not everyone can buy. And maybe just some connoisseurs, or those who grow this wine, produce this wine. I don't know, maybe my colleagues will correct me and say that culture cannot be compared to wine. But I think there is a certain wine culture, so why not? I don't know, perhaps it's the weather that reminded me of wine. And I don't think it's because I'm Russian. I think it is true for everybody. We have an opportunity to ask questions. All of us who is here, thank you for coming. If you have questions, please raise your hand. We'll have an opportunity for Q&A. And we also have viewers online, and they can send us their questions through various media. And we'll also look at these questions, and we'll find time to answer them. And the first speaker is Kathy Merlock-Jackson, professor from Department of Communication, Virginia Wesleyan University. Hello again, and please, we are ready for your presentation.
Okay, thank you. It is not forwarding. My slide is not advancing. So let me try again.
Сейчас быстро устраним ее.
Okay. Will that work? There was a problem with advancing it.
Если вам удобно, то
We can try to just do without it.
Let me begin. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here today. I'm the former president of the Popular Culture Association in America and edited for 15 years the Journal of American Culture, which is a popular culture journal. But I want to begin very briefly with what definition I find most effective about popular culture. And it's from Ray B. Brown in his book, Popular Culture, The World Around Us. Brown defined popular culture as follows. Popular culture is the cultural world around us, our attitudes, habits, and actions, how we act and why we act, what we eat, wear, our buildings, roads, and means of travel, our entertainment, sports, our politics, religion, medical practices, our beliefs and activities, and what shapes and controls them. It is, in other words, to us, what water is to fish. It is the world we live in. So a very encompassing definition of popular culture. I will continue with Ray Brown, who goes on to say this: popular culture is the culture of the people, of all the people, as distinguished from a select, small, upper-class group. It is also the dominant culture of minorities, of ethnic, social, religious, or financial minorities. As the way of life of a people, popular culture has existed since the most primitive of times. It has obviously become more complex and sophisticated as means of communicating have developed. So the sense that we've always had popular culture, but it's becoming more complex. Now, my area of study is primarily youth culture and children's culture, and I'm struck by the fact that we are immersed in popular culture from birth. The process of embracing and interpreting mass culture begins when we are very young. Children are like little sponges absorbing the popular culture around them. the music, the television shows, the movies, the way people look, the way people act. Adolescents are even more cued into popular culture. They're trying to fit in, and popular culture helps them to do that. Popular indicates what's important, what we should know, what's acceptable or not, what's normal, what's cool. And this happens throughout our lives. Throughout our lives, popular culture connects us, giving us a shared culture. And I emphasize that, a shared culture. No matter who we are, we have something in common with others, something to talk about. I've often said that there are only two things you can strike up a conversation with anyone about. One is popular culture, the other is the weather, and I guess today we could put the pandemic into that category. But typically, it's popular culture and the weather. This ability of mass culture to unite people and traverse class is its greatest attribute. Okay, the question then is not whether popular culture or mass culture is kitsch or boon. It just is. Popular culture provides the stories of a culture in which we all participate. Our narratives are popular culture narratives. The same mass media artifact may resonate with and be interpreted by different audience members in different ways. One of the things that I teach at my university is film and television, and it's amazing how I can show something and everyone uses his or her own selective processes to key in on certain elements of that narrative. Some things people pass over and others say it's the most important element of the narrative. So we interpret things differently. Popular culture may traverse class and time. Shakespeare's plays, for example, began as popular entertainment. Today, they are considered elite art. Popular culture influences high culture, and high culture influences popular culture. We understand each better if we know them both. Certainly in the area of fashion, high fashion is certainly influenced by street fashion and vice versa. Mass culture is dynamic and versatile. And I'll end with this. Popular culture functions on various levels. It becomes then a site of struggle. Often a popular culture artifact embodies mixed messages, suggesting one thing on the surface and something very different underneath. That popular culture gives us the codes of our culture. Again, one of the things that I've studied is children's culture toys. So you have something like in this case, a Barbie doll, who on one hand looks very progressive in all these different careers, be it an astronaut or a firefighter, but yet looks very frivolous in the bright colors and the high heels. We have music stars who on one hand seem to be progressive, seem to be strong, seem to be feminist icons. On the other hand, they're overly sexualized. So we've got mixed messages embodied in our popular culture. And that's really important. You can't just say something is elite or popular. There's a lot more to it if you get into the analysis. Because popular culture is so pervasive and familiar, like the wallpaper in our homes, we often fail to look at it critically, seeking out its underlying value and messages. We overlook its complexity. However, if we ask the right questions, we can learn a lot about our culture and ourselves. So my position is kitsch or not, popular culture is rich, provocative, and compelling. And I look forward to the rest of our conversation. Thank you.
Кэти, спасибо большое.
Thanks, Kathy. Since our time is limited, we need to move on. And our next speaker is going to be Vsevolod Lisovsky, director and film director and actually director of the Cultural Center, and also commissar. Could you explain what does it mean, commissar? Well, I do not understand the meaning of the word film director, and that's why I decided to call myself a commissar or an inspirer, because a director has a reference to a certain mythology, and I have issues with this mythology. And there are many, actually, mythologies that I have issues with. And what I'd like to talk about today is, in my view, it is not really relevant to oppose popular and elite culture. You were quite right when you compared the cultural product with wine. I think this is a very correct comparison, because a product of culture, a cultural product, is a product that needs to be consumed. And what is a specific feature of modern consumption? A consumer consumes something not to satisfy his or her needs, but to self-describe him or her through the product they consume. So, self-definition or self-description. He is a person who drinks this kind of wine, or that kind of vodka, or water. And this brings us to a counterintuitive situation when a person consumes something to define him or herself through this product, and on the other hand produce things that these people will consume, basically produce other people, other identities. And there is a common identity crisis or consumption crisis. And it's rather problematic. Why do we have culture and art? Because these are all kinds of cognitive activity. And why do we have cognitive activity? Because cognitive activity expands the area that you don't know about. It's the more you know, the more you understand that you don't know a thing. The broader is the spectrum of things that a person doesn't know about. Why do we need culture? Probably it's like, you know, a bloodthirst of vampires. It's people thirst for knowledge. It's like vampires thirst for blood. And how did art worked in the past? Art added some degree of strangeness to the everyday life. When you are hammering nails all day long, you need to have something strange in your life, and you need to have a second reality. And art brought this second reality. But now, if a person is doing blockchain, God forbid, or something else, how can we surprise this person? How can we surprise anyone with this second reality? Be it an elite product or popular product, his or her worldview won't get more complicated by this. And then, again, what I said, a person defines him or herself through the product they consume. And in any way, nothing is happening to this person, because that's how it is. So I think that the front line is not between the mass and the elite, but between the cultural product as an artifact of consumption and an event, a certain event that becomes a trigger causing an existential event. So that when a cultural product is produced and consumed, there would be ideally no consumers, only actors. Everybody would be taking part in this process, not just consume it. We live in a time that suffers from inflation, visual inflation, narrative inflation, and I do not see the reason to produce yet another image or yet another story. I have a feeling that a story is a symptom. Our consciousness is infected by this as a fungus. And I've done this experiment many times. I did some various unrelated things, and the viewers drew certain cause and effect relations among those things. So causal relations. It's in our brains, and it's all based on drama. The drama narrative is in our brains like a fungus. And drama is about different cause and effect relations. It's different from what we are having now. And probably we need more complicated relations then. Not so obvious, like cause and effect, and more intricate, and this way closer to the truth. And the truth is what we do not understand. If we understand something, it cannot be truth by default.
Одно тут замечу.
Thank you very much. I just have one remark. You mentioned blockchain. I recently viewed an interview with a prominent blockchain person from Russia, and he was very enthusiastic about a fantastic trilogy that he read. And I think this is the moment where classic culture, because literature, well, it's centuries old, and at the same time, this modern thing. So his code was inspired by something he read. Not just a side remark. Let us continue. Next speaker is Garrett Malcolm, Royal Designer for Industry, Creative Director at Images & Co. and Artistic Director at Design Manchester. Please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, my name is Malcolm Garrett. Thank you, Kathy, for defining the popular cultural landscape. I think it was a really good description. I think what I'd like to do now is give you some background and context to who I am and give a brief perspective on my particular appreciation of popular culture. For my part, I see little difference between an elite or a popular culture. I'm a graphic designer. Working in visual spaces, so this presentation will be more pictures than words. For me, all of life circulates around what is and what isn't popular culture. Music, lifestyle, art, design, and rebellion have shaped my life. I've been immersed in popular culture, and I've always identified with the counterculture, with questioning the role of media through a cultural landscape. And to that end, I've been conscious that I've been collecting the artifacts of cultural media ever since I was a child. I've been absorbing this popular culture, and I've been collecting memorabilia, ephemera, and popular and countercultural artifacts that have inspired, excited, and influenced me ever since I was a young child. And I've now set up the Malcolm Garrett collection at Manchester Metropolitan University in their Special Collections Museum. So it seemed relevant to kind of refer to that collection in the context of this talk. It probably all started here. In 1963, when I was 7, with the first record by the Beatles that came into our home in the north of England. And I still have that record. That's one of the oldest artifacts in the collection. Pretty soon after, as a child, I started reading this comic. This is a comic called TV 21, and it celebrated a series of TV programs that were on British TV made by Jerry Anderson, and they were all sort of set in futuristic landscapes. And this was really my first exposure to graphic design. And so already I'm absorbing... Oh. Okay. Is it stuck somewhere?
Да, к сожалению, прямо сейчас не видно.
Unfortunately, we don't see your slides, but now we do.
Либо это ваш рабочий стол.
Or it's just your computer. It looks like a elite culture object. We can see your slides now. Yes. Just the comic you were speaking about.
I'm not quite sure whether you've missed any of that presentation. But I'll carry on regardless, because I know we'll probably be short of time. Just to say that I've for a long time I've been collecting the cultural artifacts of mass media, mass culture, and popular culture, mainly through television and films. The first James Bond film I went to see was Thunderball. James Bond is hugely popular in the UK and the world over. I've been collecting the artifacts of, as envisaged by festivals like the Festival of the Britain and the New York World's Fair. I grew up in the 60s, always fascinated with space. My heroes were Yuri Gagarin and Valentina Tereshkova, and obviously the Gemini and Apollo astronaut programs. I've even been recently parodying the graphics of the space race in my own work there for a band called Heaven 17 that I worked with. I was hugely influenced by pop art in the 60s. My favorite pop artist was an English pop artist called Peter Phillips, and of course Andy Warhol. And of course, Warhol completely dissolved the boundaries between elite and popular culture. The very phrase pop art defines a bringing together of popular culture and elite fine art. And Warhol and the pop artists of the 60s they were hugely, had a huge influence on me as a young teenager. But most importantly, I grew up with music. And the turning point for me was, as a teenager, was the music of the heavy metal bands of the late 60s and early 70s. Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, Deep Purple introduced me to music as a way of defining your own life. Music, as a teenager, kind of helps express the unexpressible for a generation that's just beginning to find its own voice. Interestingly, the LP sleeve in the 70s was pretty much like social media. The album that you carried under your arm going to school was told the rest of the class and told the world what you were about, who you were, and what kind of a person you were by the visual media that you carried around. My favorite band was a band called Hawkwind, who operated completely outside of the music industry and set up their whole cultural environment, and their influence has kind of endured with me from that period, and influenced me as a person and me as a graphic designer. And part of the way you represent yourself in a cultural space is in the clothes you wear. And on the right there, you see Vivienne Westwood wearing a clothing that itself is just a jumble of symbols of mass, cultural, and religions and politics. It's a gender-free garment, soft materials for a hard-hitting garment. And that's me, second from the left there, in 1977 at a gig in London by Buzzcocks. And here I am at my graduation, my show. I studied graphic design at Manchester Polytechnic, and this is me at my degree show. And as you'll see, the clothes I'm wearing are, if you like, symbols of my own identity. And fast forwarding, I've been collecting those clothes. I never threw anything away, and I collected all the clothes. And now this is a shot from a recent exhibition of some of the garments in my collection. But I started life as a graphic designer designing record sleeves. And this is the very first record sleeve I designed with a college friend of mine called Linda, who created this montage of imagery, itself exploiting imagery from popular culture, from men's magazines and from catalogues of domestic appliances. And I went on to work throughout the 70s and 80s with hundreds, literally hundreds of the bands in the UK. These are my first three albums from Buzzcocks. And you'll see here, the artifacts of popular culture are displaying the symbols and the primitive shapes as defined by the Bauhaus in Germany in the 20s, with the square, the circle, and the triangle, and basic primary colors. So again, you see a merger of elite, if you like, elite symbols and elite typographic forms within a popular cultural framework. Perhaps the most well-known band I work with is a band called Duran Duran, and this is their arguably the best-known record sleeve that I produced for Duran Duran. It's become a true icon for there, and as an illustration of the importance of popular culture to people and the way people can identify with a simple graphic representation of something that's bigger than just a piece of plastic wrapped in a piece of cardboard, is when this kind of thing happens. I love this collection of parodies of the sleeve. It's proof of the success of the global recognition when this happens, and only a strong and resilient visual brand can survive this kind of parody. And ironically, it also strengthens it. The most recent, I love this one, in pandemic times. Here's the latest, Contemporary View. And the band themselves have just released a whole range of merchandise based on this sleeve. Yes, you can get your own pillow. I'm not sure whether this actually exists, but I really love it. Duran Duran beer, and this is perhaps the ultimate. Is when you choose to kind of mark your own body with the symbols of the cultural symbols of your idols. So I hope I've given you kind of a little bit of flavor of who I am, my understanding of cultural media, and how I have, throughout my personal life and my professional life, I've been immersed in visuals of cultural media, and so kind of one thing I hope you'll take from this is that popular culture dissolves the boundaries between the populist and the elite, I think in particularly interesting and notable ways. So thank you for that. And in the meantime, you can follow me on these popular cultural platforms. Thank you.
Спасибо большое, Малкольм. Очень...
Thank you, Malcolm. Indeed, that was very enlightening. And many people now realize who actually made those covers. And now they had the pleasure of seeing this person alive now. Very often, the actors of the elite culture are very much immersed in the popular culture and draw from it, but not the other way around. Maybe that's something that we can talk about next time. Moving on, Lyudmila Zaporozhtseva, professor of School of Integrated Communications, is with us offline from Higher School of Economics. Lyudmila, over to you. Good afternoon, distinguished colleagues and guests. It is a distinct pleasure for me to take part in this talk because I am dealing with the topic of mass culture and popular culture. Actually, my thesis was on popular culture, and I still research this phenomenon from the semantic point of view. And it was very interesting to hear the views of my colleagues, and it's very good that we agree on many things. And this is what I actually would like to do, not to share my own views, but comment on others. My stance is semiotic. I am the follower of the Moscow School of Semiotics, originated from the Tartu University. And what Kate said resonated with me. She said that mass culture is as a habitat, as an environment where people live. And this is where you remember what Yuri Lotman, a distinguished semantics researcher, said about semiosphere. And by the way, Lotman is one of the authors of the definition of culture. And as you know, culture has myriad of various definitions, but there are some conceptual frameworks that have been established quite some time ago, and they define the common approaches to culture. And Lotman said that culture is a semiosphere. So, in other words, a space of meaning and the product of this meaning by a person. So it's a continuous process of semiosis. Semiosis is a process of giving meaning by a person to the objects around this person. And a human being, unlike animals, this is one of the characteristic traits of a human being, populates the spaces around them with meanings. So, if we say that a mass culture is a habitat of sorts, we inevitably come to the realization that today's topic of discussion has been worded very provocatively, because, let's put it this way, so it's rather provocative to compare Kitsch and Boon, so ethical and ethical categories and aesthetic. And this brings us to Jose Ortega y Gasset and the Frankfurt School, who were researching the definitions of a mass culture and elite culture, the boundaries that lay between them. And why do I bring this up? And why do I mention the provocativeness of the wording of today's talk? A mass culture as something that opposes to an elite culture dates back hundreds of years, centuries, and these issues were discussed in times when mass culture was the result of the Second Industrial Revolution. And it was based on the media that were available to humankind back then. Radio, cinema in a very early stages, literature, comics, and now we are living in the time of the fourth industrial revolution, the third being the digitalization and computerization. Now we are on the brink or entering the fourth industrial revolution. And I'm talking about the metaverse concept here, a space where physical infrastructure is added and becomes more complicated by the virtual infrastructure. And these are the circumstances that we live in, the environment that we live in. And this allows the mass culture that was opposed to the high culture, the elite culture. This allows this culture to be so capable of producing products of various order and various nature, so capable that we inevitably need to ask, which culture is more complicated and complex and gives you more opportunities to interact with it? And I was thinking about this when I realized that Nikolai Scriabin, who didn't live to witness the first dramatic development of mass culture, would be very happy to have the means that an average person, school kid, has. You might have heard about this. Scriabin had an idea that he wanted to implement his entire life, idea called Mysterio. He wanted to create a work of art. He was a composer, by the way. He wanted to create a work of art that would combine all existing languages of culture available to humankind. Music, visual art, color music, space, acting, and even olfactory art, if it existed the way he thought it would. So that's the project that he was bearing in mind his entire life. He didn't implement it, but had he lived now, he would be the happiest man alive, because when we see concert staged in Minecraft, or museum exhibitions, or fashion shows hosted in a computer game, where you can gather a huge audience and stage a play in a game, enjoying 5D opportunities that with all the senses and pouring water from the roof, from the ceiling, it opens up immense opportunities to create new cultural products. So my thought here was that, like this, it was the mass culture that made humankind to look for these tools, because being a commercial culture, based on the classical definition of mass culture, it was seeking for opportunities to engage with new clients, with new consumers. And by doing this, it allowed high culture, or the elite culture, to do some things that it couldn't do. It's like with poor artists. You can draw a parallel here. A person has a concept, but he or she cannot do this, cannot implement this concept because they have no money. And it's the same with cultures. The popular culture gave rise to the elite culture, the high culture. I believe that this opposition, one versus the other, is anachronic. Our habitat is neither good or bad. It's not about this being good and this being bad. Our environment is just, that's what it is, our environment. And talking about mass culture and opposing it to other types of culture, when it was formulated, mass culture was a subculture. It could have been localized as a phenomenon of human development back then, at that time. But today, and again, it's neither good or bad, it's a fact. Mass culture, or pop culture, there are different approaches where distinctions lie, can be viewed as a language of communication. And this, I believe, is an important thing to bear in mind, because when we talk about mass culture having the status of a language, then it becomes a boon, something good, something positive, because the more languages you know, the better. And mass culture is one of the languages a modern human being can communicate, learn the world, transmit, broadcast meanings. And by the way, you cannot know all the mass cultural texts that exist today. And there are some complicated, complex works of art such as The Matrix or Avatar. They are rather multifaceted. And the meanings that authors envisioned in those works can be broadened by the audience later on. So if humankind believes that this text, mass cultural text, is relevant, that means that this text becomes the communication tool, a tool of the contemporary language of the contemporary person. So mass culture is both an environment and a language, and it's a product. So for me, as a researcher, it's a boon. Because thanks to mass culture, I, as a researcher, anthropologist and semiotics researcher, understand today's humankind better, today's human being better. I can understand how the world is changing. And this enables all anthropologists and researchers to see the development of this concept. So mass culture, again, I might sound provocative now, but I believe that mass culture as a product of humankind has predicative effects as well. So we can trace future vectors, like vectors for future development of humankind. And the theory of social recognition also resonated with me, because it has been around for quite some time, but but it gives us more tools to see what's happening on the inside. What else? I wanted to say something else. Yes, I liked your idea about drama. There was some interesting choice of words that you said about drama. I didn't want to interrupt you, so I decided to comment on this later on. I think this is an excellent, brilliant example of the way of a mythological mindset is working. and getting back to the mass culture, can be linked to the topic of our discussion. A myth gives a human a chance to overcome certain conflicts, to resolve certain conflicts. A person sees an event A and an event B, and they cannot understand why B happened when A was also happening. And through the mythological mindset, the person makes cause and effect relations, and thus linking two effects. So this mythologization or dramatization is a way to understand the world. And it also has a therapeutic effect because it calms people. You can show primitive links and primitive relations. The speaker is not using the microphone. Well, there are only 33 stories, main narrative stories around. Yes, I'd like to bring the 34th around. So there are just 33 typical standardized stories. Well, it's the question to you then. As a representative of a unique elite art, like, what do you want me to do? To invent the 8th key? Why not? Anyway, I think that mass culture is a wonderful product of human work, and at the same time, this is a vast environment that enables humankind to develop further on as a semiosphere, as a habitat, as an environment, and also as a field of symbolic actions that a human being produces or performs. So if we oppose one against the other, although I wouldn't be doing this in 2021, but still, if I were responding to the Frankfurt School, I would be saying that mass culture is Boon. It's a good thing.
Такой яркой.
Thank you very much, Ludmila, for this colorful presentation. But this is what I learned from it, or rather, it gave me food for thought. Mass culture can be handled by certain people, and those who have more money can propagate a certain culture. And for instance, the Marvel universe, it's all around us, so they propagate their own ideas. And sometimes these ideas are not mass ideas. Let me just briefly comment. And our British colleague mentioned Andy Warhol, and I have an example about him. I think everyone remembers the Campbell soup can, a picture. So he turned something mass into something elite, into a piece of art. And now there is a tendency to micro-collecting. So modern culture, artifacts become like pieces of collections of like small private collections. And Warhol made a lot of pieces. And I think his marketing strategy is more popular now. To mass produce an image so that people who eat Campbell soup can also hang a jar of Campbell soup above the table. But I don't know. What would happen if this picture would hang above an empty soup can that was eaten? We can discuss this later. I think many people would want to comment. But first, let us give the floor to the final speaker, Arsene Gonchukov, director, screenwriter, poet, and writer. Hello. I think the mass culture is an evil. So I think, against all the presenters today. So my opinion is contrary. But I am ready to condemn the mass culture, and I will negate it as much as I can. But well, let me speak seriously. I look at this thing from a different point of view. And today you have academics with us, those who study life, who study societies. I am not an academic. I am from an artistic sphere. I am a film director primarily. So I make films with my hands. I write screenplays, and then I film, and then I produce. So I would narrow down the mass culture idea, because I know that maybe some academics would say, like, it's an environment, it is something to study. But to me, mass culture is not an interesting object of study. Mass culture is interesting, is fine. I consume it, I absorb it like everybody else. But this happens unconsciously, automatically. This is why I'm not don't like this work. We absorb it, like language, like gender, like some social construct. So I would speak about mass culture in terms of its commercial aspect, commercial production of TV shows, publishing of books, etc. So this aspect is closer to me, and this is what I wanted to talk about. I'm afraid to come across as a patriot, like this uncompromising patriot, and someone old-fashioned, because I see a juxtaposition between mass culture and elite culture. I think it exists. It didn't go anywhere. It is a war. It is an opposition. And sometimes it's quite toxic, and it's very harmful. I don't want to come across as an 80-year-old lady who says that kids should only read Tolstoy and Dostoevsky. It wouldn't be bad, but I am a progressive person. But at the same time, I am very clear that elite culture, highbrow culture in Russia today, so let us go back to Russia. So in Russia, it goes through some hard times, including commercial culture, TV and cinema. So the things that are developing today, it brings nothing good. So it performs quite well. It brings a lot of money, multi-billion budget for mass culture films. So DC Universe, Marvel Universe, I watched them. I watched the latest Dune, but I understand that this is mass culture. There is nothing sacred about it. It's just something that comes and goes. It's a product. It is interesting. It maybe shows us something, but it doesn't touch anything deep within me. So it's not up to my taste. It brings me no aspirations. Not just to something higher, something superior. I also like an underground culture, counterculture, some hard things, something that people are not used to. So it's not about the high or low, but the so-called elite culture, it sometimes doesn't have anything elite in it, but it has energy, it has a positive charge, it has some will to live, it has strive for knowledge, it has immense creative potential. When one artist, through just one piece of art, can completely change the world, change the entire worldview through one film, one painting, one piece of music, and just to overnight become an idol, like Vsevolod is doing some radical things in theater. He just, I think, shook up some things in the theater world in Russia. I make films that look nothing like anything else. No one does what I do, and people say that I'm crazy. But let me remind you that some have many billions, and like, for instance, Netflix with 200 million subscribers. It's like a huge country. A few years ago, they had 50 million subscribers, and we thought it was shocking. But now it's 200. So it's like 5 times more. But at the same time, but there is a person whom everybody knows, and I think he's somewhere around us here, Alexander Sakurov. He didn't make new films for several years. For 6 years, Zvyagintsov didn't make any films. It's just a simple fact. You can think about it later on the way home. So these are the people who symbolize the upper level, the elite level of Russian culture. But paradoxically, and due to some political, social, financial situation, these people are now unable to create, to film. But their projects can only be made with a lot of money, because these are high-caliber filmmakers. I will not go into details why, but this is a bad tendency. So I think this juxtaposition between mass and elite cultures exists. These are two trends. And in his time, Tarkovsky wrote an entire book. He was an idealist. And he thought that the highbrow culture is the only thing that has meaning in our life. It is what explains our life, gives us meaning. And I agree with him. So he wanted culture to be like religion, to give us spiritual value. I think it is impossible. It is too idealist. But at the same time, I can't say that we just watch some TV shows and there is no elite culture. This isn't true. It exists. For instance, in France, in film production, the system works this way. Hollywood films that are distributed in France, in French cinemas, there is a system, I'm sure of it. I don't know the details, but I'm sure it's true. So part of the revenues goes, is allocated for local film industry. So these films that are very approachable, very easily to be understood by everyone, this industry feeds the elite caste of artists. But it feeds this very thin layer at the very top, above the reptile brain of the mass culture. Those who produce few artworks who are not, they are not dumbed down for the masses. They are slightly above, so that the masses would be attracted to it, like to a magnet. And I view this problem from the practical side. This is a social problem. It exists. We shouldn't forget about it. But in terms of creative processes, we need to understand that the top, the very tip, it is at the top not because of some privileges. It's just because of its nature. It's a total different subject. I watched a discussion about auteur cinema in Russia, and people say that there is just no money for it in Russia. No place to get this money. I write to sponsors, give me please 100,000 rubles, 200,000 rubles. Sometimes I get it. And my colleagues, other filmmakers, they are in exactly the same situation. There are no sources for funding for auteur films. Even for those who already achieved something, those who are already award winners, who have contributed something to the culture. This is a huge issue. But from the creative side, it is avant-garde, not of the entire culture, it's too lofty perhaps. It is an avant-garde of artistic thought. It is artistic work, like Sakurov calls his work. It is artistic work. An artist looks for meanings, relevant meanings. He or she develops their view of the modern society, the modern human. He or she tries to identify certain images that reflect the modern spirit. To understand why it is important, I think you can just watch any recent films made by Zvyagintsev. You may like it or dislike it, but you can see that what he has to say is important. And it is also important that right now he cannot say anything. It is important to see, because it's like out of sight, out of mind. It is a creative avant-garde of sorts. They create new meanings, new values. It is important to remember. And but at the same time, I do not want to belittle mass culture, but at the same time, I believe that elite culture in Russia needs support.
Сейчас, Людмила, сейчас я позволю вам прокомментировать.
Thank you. We have not too much time left, because all the speakers decided to take their time to express their views. Well, it's also important. Let's comment now. Ludmila, you go first. Yes, one thing I'd like to comment. When we talk about the opposition of the elite culture and the mass culture, very often people repeat a stereotypical thought about the masses that do not understand the elite culture. So the elite culture is inaccessible for them. I, as a philanthropist, think that all people can access to all cultures. It's just not everyone has the luxury of perception for a long time and the luxury of exposure for a long time. Very often it's like I have a little bit of free time and I can do something about it. But the world is getting faster and faster, and most of the people do not have time for slow consumption for a long time with analysis and ruminations. And it's a pity, it's a huge pity, because I believe that the elite culture has a very limited audience. Yes, indeed, the elite culture is getting smaller and smaller. Kalina Krasnaya by Shukshin. Is it popular or elite? That was a Soviet movie from the 60s, I think. There were so many Hollywood movies with a very good narrative built in. The Shawshank Redemption, American Beauty. They can be attributed to an elite culture. So it's not a problem to delineate those two. It can be both. So what Vasily Shukshin was actually making, an elite film or a popular film? Because it can be classified as both, as either. So the boundaries are very very narrow. And as far as financing in our country is concerned, you know the only source of financing, Ministry of Culture. And it's not about being elite or popular, it's about just whims of Russian officials, and they give money to whomever they want to give. But something tells me that it's not only the Russian thing. And it's like this everywhere. Elite art cannot be supported widely. Popular art gets something that is trickling down from above, and it's also being fed by something that is below. And elite culture retains the elements of the popular culture and of the very, very basic culture. And Sakurov, by the way, even though he doesn't make any new films, he still works. He coaches his student, Kantemir Balagov, and yes, his pupils are quite successful, and even commercially successful, and critically acclaimed. Let's give a chance to speak to Kathy. Kathy, you've been silent for 1 hour, and you probably have something to say. Go ahead.
This has been a really interesting discussion. A couple points I want to make. I think that we are defined by what lasts, and I think historically that has been elite culture. That generation after generation we look back to that. I'm wondering if that will be the case for the future. That what I see is more of a merging, more of a crossover. That that when we look at elite culture, we look at a top-down culture, not a bottom-up culture. And I think as times change, as we put more emphasis on the audience as opposed to the creator, the maker, that we're seeing things merging and going forward, in a place where the audience has more power, more of a chance to choose, where we become more of a bottom-up culture. What will last? Will it just be the elite culture, the great plays, the great novels, the great works of art, or will some of these popular artifacts resonate for generations in the future? That I think that there's something different happening now, and I think hitting on the metaverse and hitting on the fact that we're just not able to compartmentalize now and in the future in the way that we've been able to do so in the past. So I think that if anything, that popular culture is going to become more important, and I would not be surprised, I don't have a crystal ball, but I would not be surprised if, as we define cultures in the future, that what is popular will rise up in a way that it hasn't before, and that our cultures will be defined as much by the popular as by the elite. And I think that's an important change, that as technology becomes more pervasive, as things merge, as there become more and more crossovers, I think that we're going to see a difference in what we deem is as important, and what creates our ideas. That ideas don't just come from the elite, that ideas come from the way that people look at things around them, whether they were designed as elite or whether they were designed to be for the masses. So that's my observation.
Вот это совершенно точно.
Excellent. Thank you for this thought. And what remains? That's an interesting question. And there are many tools that enable different actors now that enable these actors to create something. Internet, for instance. Well, it can be called a tool for creation, creative tool. And now people as young as age 2 or 3 can create something and upload things online. Well, with the help of their parents, of course, but still. And the question is, who is going to tell good from bad? Who is going to tell us what is elite and what is not? Will it be the masses who decide that, or will it be someone else who will tell us what is good and what is bad? Malcolm, what do you think?
Just to unmute myself. I was Kathy. I found that very interesting what you were saying about what is elite and how do we define elite. And I think what you were kind of alluding to is that we're arriving at a different definition of elite. In the past, it was something that lasted. But I think what is elite now is what has greatest exposure, and then makes a greater number of connections with people around the world. I mean, what I tried to illustrate with my Rio record sleeve, out of the hundreds of record sleeves I've designed, that is the one that I am repeatedly told by the audience, and this is a bottom-up response. I am repeatedly told by the audience that this is the one record sleeve that is a cultural icon and is its own type of elite. What I also try to get over is that in the 40 odd years that I've been working within music and within youth culture, the reason I kind of started to work in that space is that I was very interested in how music, certainly when you're a kind of a late teenager, mid to late teenager, music and lifestyle and cultural lifestyle are the tools that an individual uses to find their own identity and to express that identity to the world. And so I think the contemporary vision of elite now is through that mass exposure, then individuals are able to select what it is that resonates with them and then make the point through identifying with that what is elite to them. So I think, Kathy, you're right, that the elite is now, because of the mass exposure of media that we have, the elite is being defined by the audience. And there's an irony in that the greater the exposure something has, the more likely it is to reach people to make that definition of what is elite for them. So yeah, that's kind of my view of where we're going, in its own way, that will define what will last into the future. Except with the caveat that, of course, that in the digital space, it's increasingly difficult to see how things will last without physical form. But that's another question.
Ну вот здесь вот встает очень вопрос в том смысле.
And here is another question. At least in Russia, young people, so a large group of young people, maybe the Generation Z, maybe they read, but in like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, Russian youngsters didn't read a lot. And this is when TV shows became more popular. And they brought their own meanings, and maybe replacing some meanings from literature. And now we have TV shows, so a simplified meaning. And I wonder which layer of culture will remain. What is the elite? What is mass? And maybe an author just carried one idea in him or her through their entire life, and maybe the idea is interpreted very differently by the consumers. I don't agree that the masses will decide what will be elite, but I think it's like a paradox. The masses will just consume the mass culture. They will just watch a TV show before going to bed. But elite culture is institutionalized. I think it exists in entirely different categories. But I will agree that the pyramid is reversed. It's upside down. And in the past maybe 30 or 40 years in Russia, and maybe in other countries as well, there are no main poet, main writer, main author. There is no one decides who is our main poet, who is the best of the best. It's like in the beginning of 20th century, maybe we had Anna Akhmatova, but right now we can't say there is just one poet that everyone must read. There are no geniuses. Because I can say this person is our main poet, but other people will disagree, and time will tell. There was Leo Tolstoy, there was Dostoevsky, but who is now? Let me answer you. I'm sorry, Arsene, but the author has died 50 years ago. Roland Barthes said that quite a few years ago. I'm not speaking about the physical death of this or that author, of course. But right now, the interpreter becomes the main figure. You know how important it is to give food for thought to a viewer, to a reader, depending on the genre you work in. I agree that the author is dead, and this is quite right. But I think the interpreter should go with him. But the question is, who will decide? To me, it is quite a strange question. What is elite culture? What do you mean by elite? Who are the elite? Are these people who have different thoughts or more money? Mass culture is addressed to everyone, and elite culture is addressed to experts. So the distinction is in the audience. But does this mean then, in this case, an artist is above? So my audience are these very select few, and everyone else shouldn't even go near it. Right now, artists are just producers of goods. And other artists cannot be leftist, because artists, they're just bourgeoisie. They produce their own little goods. They are within the market. They find consumers for their goods. They find their own target audience for their product. And it is done very consciously. And art schools right now just teach how to position yourself on the art market. When did it start? I think it's as a mass thing. It started this century. And let me conclude with this thought. A viewer, like an average person, who maybe doesn't feel themselves to be an expert, but still they have more opportunities to speak their mind, to choose. And I don't know if it's good or bad, I will not judge it, but the Revolution 2.0 gave us this opportunity Today, art became participatory. Everyone participates in everything. Everyone can be an artist. And the majority can, to an extent, choose what they want to consume. So we shouldn't forget it. So there are more microphones, metaphorically speaking, but there are fewer ears. Many people speak, but few people listen. No, there are many ears, but we don't have much to say. So many languages, so many ears. And I think everyone doesn't have a lot to say. So art became very narrow in certain segments. It undergoes certain changes. And the market for thoughts, I think it's just what it is. It is a market. There are consumers. And the role of consumers on this market grows. I think this is the result of capitalism. We mean the infrastructure between the artist and the consumer. For example, Tarkovsky writes that everyone just scolds me about the Mirror film. So he made a film about his mother, his experiences. But a janitor from a cinema wrote to me, and she writes to me about things she understood from the film. And Tarkovsky writes that this woman was the person who understood him best, much better than all the elite critics. So there is no segregation between high and low. They're all just normal, regular people, but the aims are different. Mass culture is oriented to a larger extent to popularity and to commercial side, to propagation of comic books, films, which 5 billion people watched. But the so-called high culture, it is oriented to a larger extent to values. Not to the values that are propagated by the state, but to certain meanings. And this high culture can be very poor. Such films have audience in thousands of people. For instance, one of Sakurov's pupil made a film for just 12 million rubles. This is nothing for cinema. So it's not about some celestial beings doing one thing and us regular people doing something else. Everything is good. Like mass culture is doing okay, money-wise, viewers-wise. But I think the distinction between the mass and the elite is in their aims. Thank you very much. Thank you, Arsene. Unfortunately, we don't have much time, and there were some valuable ideas shared today, but our time is up. So to sum up, let me say that some people dealing in elite art or mass art, and sometimes it's hard to distinguish. For instance, Quentin Tarantino, is he a mass artist or an elite artist? So he shares some ideas that can be understood by everyone. But this is, I think, a question for the next time. And I hope it will also be within the framework of Culture 2.0. Thank you very much to our foreign colleagues who found time to join us. Kathy, Malcolm, thank you very much for participating. Thank you very much to Lyudmila, Arseny, and Vsevolod. My name is Sergei Fadeev. This is the end of our session. Tomorrow, Culture 2.0 will continue. Open lectures will start at 3:50 p.m. Moscow time. The first session is going to be the marketing in museums. I think it will be interesting. Thank you very much. See you tomorrow.
Театр уже давно привлекает зрителей не только в залы, но и к экранам смартфонов и планшетов. Но пандемия стала дополнительным толчком к переходу на новые форматы взаимодействия. Так, Брянский театр драмы реализует проект «Театр в 360 градусов. Новый взгляд». И одной из самых ярких постановок стала последняя лента Креппа по пьесе Беккета. Весь спектакль сняли на камеру с углом обзора 360 градусов, что создает эффект полного погружения. Российско-финляндский спектакль по пьесе Ибсена «Пер Гюнд. 3 новеллы» планировался к показу на приграничных территориях России и Финляндии. Но в новых условиях планы пришлось изменить. Команда проекта из Петрозаводска совместно с режиссером Кириллом Збитневым и финскими коллегами решила создать видеоверсию постановки. Оперный спектакль и летсплей. Такое новаторское сочетание рождает совершенно новый жанр – летсплей-опера. Премьера «Скупого рыцаря» состоялась онлайн в августе 2020-го, и с тех пор опера набрала больше 130 тысяч просмотров. Александринский театр представил новую программу «Другая сцена». Оригинальные онлайн-форматы от молодых режиссеров, хореографов, композиторов и медиахудожников. Трансляции проекта можно увидеть в группах театра в социальных сетях. В условиях вынужденной разлуки со зрителем и друг другом артисты Пермского театра у моста решили показать, как проходят их репетиции по скайпу. Получился скрин-лайв-сериал о творческом процессе под названием «Коронаизоляция». Анимацию, театр и виртуальную реальность объединил в себе проект «Алиса в стране чудес» московской студии Элиговижн. Актриса в макап-костюме на виртуальной сцене демонстрирует совершенно новый взгляд на сказку Льюиса Кэрролла.
У нас есть технология, и, соответственно, эти технологии будут каким-то образом интегрироваться в театральную жизнь, в художественную жизнь, в создание скульптур, произведений, искусства и все, что связано с культурой. Но один из первых шагов – это действительно интегрировать это в театральные подмостки. Потому что сам театр – это уже почти виртуальный ряд, потому что актер имеет возможность импровизировать на сцене. А мы даем возможность еще совместить это с виртуальными образами, и эта импровизация, она будет еще более серьезной. То есть с нашей точки зрения это все-таки художественное произведение, которое использует элементы технологий, которые мы можем предложить сейчас. Ну и одна из задач была сказать, что это есть. Ребята, давайте пользоваться вот этими технологиями и не бояться их. Попробуем создать нечто интересное не только с точки зрения технологий, но с точки зрения и произведения искусства, то есть самого театрального спектакля. То есть это еще одно измерение, которое позволяет создать произведение нового типа, реально нового типа. И если убрать, например, эту виртуальную составляющую, это будет спектакль. Если ее добавить, получается некое новое произведение, которое более технологичное и более интересно, может быть, для молодого поколения, которое уже привыкло к тому, что эти вот технологии, они везде.
Творческое осмысление опыта самоизоляции во время пандемии воплотилось в спектакле театра «Балет Москва». 6 артистов изучают уголки своей квартиры через танец. При этом жилище становится сценой, а гаджеты – полноценными участниками постановки. Сценическое искусство вне театральных сцен. Краснодарское объединение «Премьера» также показало, что границы театра условны, и весь мир может быть сценой. Выступления артистов в живописных и знаковых локациях Кубани публика может увидеть в серии видеороликов и фотографий проекта. О множестве других, не менее интересных и новаторских театральных проектов в сети можно узнать на портале «Культура онлайн». Не пропустите лучшие постановки. Подпишитесь на новости сайта.
Новый просветительский проект «Культура онлайн» — это портал о культурных инициативах в интернете. Он знакомит аудиторию с инновационными онлайн-проектами из регионов России и других стран. Российский фонд культуры в сотрудничестве с Санкт-Петербургским международным культурным форумом создал эту площадку для всех, кто интересуется и профессионально занимается культурой и искусством, а также хочет создавать свои проекты в сети. Ведь опыт других авторов и советы специалистов могут помочь и подтолкнуть к воплощению новых креативных идей. Предпосылкой к созданию ресурса послужило вручение премии «Культура онлайн» в 2020 году. На соискание премии были выдвинуты российские цифровые проекты, которые активно создавались в период пандемии. Строгие ограничения изменили традиционный формат работы учреждений культуры. На премию было подано большое количество ярких, насыщенных и оригинальных цифровых проектов. Это привело организаторов к идее собрать их в одном месте и постоянно пополнять коллекцию. На старте портал представляет свыше 230 цифровых культурных проектов. Мобильные приложения, онлайн-спектакли, виртуальные выставки, трансляции концертов, подкасты, блоги о культуре и многое другое.
День Победы — это шедевр шедевров, это император этих песен. Вот. И я очень рад, что именно мы это сделали. Я очень доволен результатом и, в общем, горжусь, что это мне пришлось в этом серьезно поучаствовать. И что это получилось. Очень хорошие отзывы. Вся страна объединилась. Это на самом деле замещение какой-то образовавшейся пустоты. Потому что, как вы знаете, концертные залы закрылись, и, в общем, вдруг остановилась концертная деятельность, театры, филармонии, а люди стремятся к этому. Важность именно в том, что не утонула сама культура, сама музыка.
«Культура онлайн» объединяет уникальный опыт сотен цифровых проектов из самых разных областей культуры. Новые идеи и формы призваны вдохновлять авторов и способствовать цифровизации культуры и развитию креативных индустрий. А информационная поддержка портала поможет уже существующим проектам обрести новую аудиторию.